Namaste and good evening, everyone. Namaste, Sraddhalu.
Namaste and welcome to everybody.
We are happy to continue today the 8th installment of this very special theme of how we can carry our current growth of consciousness deliberately in our next life. And we will take a first question from Luke in Evenings with Sraddhalu, number 239, on the organization of the mind in parenthesis, was presented as a major priority for the purpose of an integral fulfillment. Does it mean the same as the individualization of the mind mentioned in Evening Series 238, which I understood as being the training of the mind to remain stable and open to higher influences, whatever the circumstance? If not, do Sri Aurobindo and the Mother give illustrations of what this organization of the mind means practically in everyday life?
Yes, it's an important question because we have used both these terms, individualization of the mind as well as organization of the mind. We've been reading the text from the Life Divine, chapter 22, where Sri Aurobindo describes the nature of the higher worlds and the nature of the transition from one life to the other through these worlds, and the requirements, the conditions under which we are able to survive the exit from the physical body in a subtle body. Who is it that survives? What are the kinds of worlds we go through, etc. And one of the key ideas which came was, if the consciousness is not sufficiently individualized, it cannot stay on its own freed from the body, because it is the physical body which binds it and, so to say, fixes it into separateness of form. And when it separates from the physical body, if it is not in consciousness able to hold its own as a separate form, it will tend either to dissipate, or in order to retain itself as a separate individuality, it would be compelled as if to reincarnate immediately before it was fully dissipated. So it represents a very early stage of life evolution, not even mind evolution proper, but life evolution. And this is often the case with certain low-grade animals and even certain kinds of low grades of fish. The character I will describe like this: low grades of fish would be the fish which live as collectives in what is called a school of fish. So you might have something like 1,000 tiny fish, and they all turn together and move together as if one being. In such cases, those individual fish do not have that individualization that would allow it to survive, but the group as a whole might still develop a kind of an individuality. And as the fish drop off, one dies, more are born, the group as a whole in the group consciousness survives and can potentially become much longer in existence than the individual lives of the fish, which it contains in itself. It's an example of how the individualization not being sufficient in the fish might still be sustained by a kind of a group consciousness. Such a thing also can happen with more complex animals and larger animals. And of course, even among human beings, you will see sometimes, especially with very young children, where the intellect has not been sufficiently developed and there has not been much of an education. They've been whiling away their time in gangs. You have a kind of a group consciousness which tends to override the individual consciousness. And all these are signs of lower grade of evolution. The natural evolution would want to individualize and develop a sustained individuality. Now, the individualization can be in the vital life force individuality, it can be in the mental mind-body individuality, and so individualization can be generally described as overall vital, mental, combined at the human level at least, but you could have gone through stages during the animal phase and so on. At the same time, there is this idea of organization of the mind, which mind being organized allows it to act the way it chooses to and not be a mere puppet of impulses, either its own innate instincts from life energy or impulses from outside. If, for example, there is not sufficient individuality, what is it that drives the fish? Why does this group of fish suddenly turn together one side or another? So a threat perception from outside and there's a reaction. So as such, does that group of the fish have even a sense of freedom of purpose? Can it say, hey, today I want to go and explore the reef? Or is it merely swimming, looking for food, driven by some sense of smell, taste, touch? And when it senses threat, it turns away, and it's all about being pulled by desire of food or repelled by impulse of threat. Or if an individualized sufficiently, let's say fish, or even a group that is sufficiently more developed in consciousness, actually develops a kind of a mind consciousness which is able to live by itself, not as a product of external impulses and compulsions. It can then develop as a mind a series of interests, sense of purpose, sense of a conception of some possibility, and so on. And of course you won't see that in the fish for sure, but certainly it could be, though, in very highly developed mammal fish such as dolphins or whales. Not all, some. And you see there a very distinct form of individuality. Dolphins, interestingly, again, there are gradations of them, have a very strong collective consciousness. Sometimes even they have the sense as if an individual is simultaneously experiencing the dolphin consciousness through multiple bodies of its family. So there is this group consciousness and individuality at the same time. Both can be quite developed. A lot of this extreme development would take place, though, in contact with human beings. So this is just a background, but coming to the human stage of development, you can have this where a mind sufficiently organized could actually conceive for itself a sense of purpose. It would be able to assemble its resources and guide itself to fulfill that sense of purpose, independent of external push, pull, fear, reward, instinct drives. This would be the character of an organized mind. It is able to wield its own sense of purpose and its own tools, capacities and skills for a coherent, coordinated action. This would be the beginning of organization of mind. But as the mind becomes more and more developed, and especially now we are talking of mind, more than the individuality now, it is the ability to organize all its resources, all its powers around this focal point that is its sense of individuality. So it could still be a very superficial ego sense of individuality and a very crude superficial ambition, hey, I want to be stronger than the other or smarter than the other or earn more than the other. Still it is able to organize and draw upon its resources in a coordinated way, not just in a disconnected form, disjointed form. Now again, you will see this, all of us have experienced this in teenage. As the mind begins to come into its own, you have certain faculties which kick in. For example, often children at that age will find it great fun to distort words or to replace one word with another similar sounding word and make fun of it. And if they take somebody's name, they will replace by another similar sounding word and make fun of him. It's as if the capacity of the mind to play with similarity of thoughts, similarity of ideas, similarity of words is beginning to kick in, and you find that, oh, so fascinating. And then it passes, the phase passes. But if they have not been developed in intellect through suitable education or suitable nourishment, either externally or by inner push of the inner being which says, I want to know more, then often they will stay at that level of a crudely formed impulsive tendency, not coordinated, unable to harness the multiple faculties in a coordinated way of action. So this ability to coordinate all your powers and faculties is an organization of the mind. Similarly, one would have an organized vital. And it's fascinating to see people who have an organized vital. So first of all, there has to be a degree of individuality before organization can happen. So around what do you organize? What is the focal point? So this is the relationship between individualization and organization of vital or of mind. First you have a focal point. Then you relate all things to that focal point. So that now what is decided in the focal point can wield the full force of those other powers and direct them like a conductor in an orchestra is able to carry in a harmonious process. It's a good example because if you're unable to hold this organization, each note or each instrument is playing at its own pace, in its own direction or intensity, and you have maybe a general overall drift, but very haphazard, uncoordinated, and generally ineffective. So you can see this often in a what we would call an organized vital, that when the person chooses to do something, it's as if all the rest of the life energies become very quiet, turned in a common purpose, and as they move, there is this very coordinated working. There's a certain calm and focus in the way things are done, and so on. So you can have individualization, you can have organization with weak individuality, but a strong individuality but a weak organization. There's one more thing subsequent to this: individuality, organization, and then there is a third factor, which is richness of development of faculties. So you can have a simple mind, individualized and simply organized. It's good. It's already much better than most human beings if it's organized. Most people are not. But if upon that you can build a complexity and a richness of powers, of faculties, of thought, and so on, then you have something which you can look at this and say, wow, what a good instrument. And if that is then turned to the divine and becomes a vehicle for the divine expression, you say, whoa, this is worth it. So unfortunately in our education, we do not think in terms of these stages. This is how our education should have been formulated, isn't it? But coming just to this part of the richness of mind, one of the examples I will play with just as a way of training, there's this idea which is put in the text called Alice in Wonderland, where there's this rabbit, and he says, remember, Alice in Wonderland was written by a mathematician. He was not a storyteller, he was a mathematician. And so the intellect and his mathematical abilities are somehow embedded in the storyline, and his ability to think out of the box is what makes it special. So there's this rabbit who says, every morning before breakfast, I try to think of one impossible thing. Now, that's a very interesting exercise. Try to do that. Can you imagine, think, conceive of something which is impossible? Something which you have never conceived of or thought before. Something which you have never seen before. Conceive, visualize, experience, glimpse, articulate, then can you express it? So, even with the richness of mind, the fourth step would be ability to articulate. Now, you may be able to articulate with a very simple individualized mind, and perhaps well, but with its simplicity. But you can have a rich, uncoordinated, unorganized ability to express would be reduced also. But if you have a rich, organized, and then the power of expression to be able to articulate exactly what you're perceiving, thinking. I've seen many people, they have sometimes a very clear idea but do not know how to translate it into expression. This becomes the fourth thing required for an effective manifestation. Now, if you can see the four things in terms of mind. The same four things would exist also at the level of the vital, in principle at all levels of the vital, at all levels of the mind, and even in the physical consciousness. If you think of it in these terms, you have a very comprehensive educational program. But the fifth thing which is still missing for all these is that all these different parts, all these different individualized, organized, rich, flowering and expressive power should be integrated around one true person. Otherwise, the vital going in a different way, the mind going in a different way, the biology pulling in a different way, or according to the mood. I do this according to my mood, suddenly I'm a completely different person. My demands, my expectations, requirements flip according to the mood. It shows lack of overall individuality, which is persistent. You can have the ego-desire complex, which is your individual center. It's not useful because it's too fickle, unstable and changing. Mass of humanity is built on that. Where there is an individualization of the mind sufficiently, you may still not have made that the focal point for the personality. So to make that the focal point for the personality would be an achievement. And then that would be preparatory to the eventual transfer of the focal point of individuality to your psychic being. The true person within now, working through the mind, sometimes in some people through an individualized, organized vital, but mostly some element of the mind individuality is absolutely necessary before it can come forward in any meaningful way without distortion. If there has not been the power of the mind individualized to be able to stand back from itself and observe. A pure expression developing through an individualized vital is dangerous, because the vital can at any point seize upon the psychic influence and warp it. And the danger of that is, on the other side, you will feel the psychic influence, but the expression will be totally warped and you won't understand why. You yourself, as the expressor, would not realize that you have warped it unless you have an individualized mind that stands back, sees this and says, I have just allowed a distortion to come in. What do I do now? So the focal point of individual mind would then act upon the vital to quiet it, still it, turn it to the psychic influence, and train it to become an instrument of the psychic, rather than seizing upon and hijacking the psychic influence for its own desire, impulse, tendency. So this is a critical element for the mind part to be able to stand back on its own in an individualized way, to be able to prevent such kinds of distortions. So I think this is a comprehensive answer to this whole topic of individualization and organization and what else has to follow. We can go to a second question.
The second question of Luke. Even though I think I understand the principle of multiple stratas, multiple gradations of concrete worlds being less and less coarse and rigid, and even though I feel an interest to explore them as well as my causal physical reality, the main thing I can describe about my experience up to now is the progressively greater ability to face the habits, desires, emotions, and thoughts that show up through me, and to calm them. Even though I intend not to focus too much on the physical world, and even I feel I don't have very specific and crucial things to do in my everyday life, apart from my integral progress, my as sincere as possible presence, and my participation to more harmony, I have the impression that the other stratas, the other gradations of concrete worlds, are hidden from me. I don't have the obvious feeling to touch their detailed content, apart maybe at night, but I find it difficult to tell. When I hear the mother's comment about Sujata going consciously to Sri Aurobindo's house in the subtle physical very often at night, I feel how precious it must have been compared to so many of my activities. She went to Sri Aurobindo in the subtle physical. It is a true, real, concrete thing, as concrete as here, in parentheses.
So this is the quotation from the mother saying that Sujata used to go to Sri Aurobindo, and the subtle physical is as concrete as here. So yes, the question has actually touched upon many aspects, and I want to kind of cover them all, because it might be the case for many of us who, in our overall spiritual aspiration and turn of life, even living a life that is the closest we can to what we would conceive of as a spiritual, conscious, evolutionary purpose, find ourselves often in this kind of mixed, not so useful, not so rapid, not so effective growth, but doing something which is simple, basic, which could be preparatory. So in this case, for example, Luke is saying that understanding the gradations of consciousness is one thing, but and although there's an interest, there is not much beyond the ability to become progressively able to face your habits, emotions, and thoughts that pop up within you, and then to calm them. So this much you're able to do. But what do I do? How do I find these gradations? Secondly, he says, though I intend not to focus too much on the physical world, even though I don't feel I have specific crucial things to do, I feel that I don't have specific crucial things to do in my everyday life, apart from general progress and being sincere and greater harmony. The other strata feel as if they are hidden, and you don't have the obvious sense of being able to experience them. Now, both of these things I want to touch. You see, the problem of this kind of a general approach is that the approach is too limited. The understanding of the nature of the sadhana itself has been too narrow. Or you have read some specific quotations which touched you at some point and you said, yes, this I want to do. And then the rest of your life you do only that, without looking at the larger scope of the sadhana. This is the reason why it is so essential particularly in the context of the integral yoga, to have the full picture of the sevenfold framework of the integral yoga and the understanding of how those are to be put into practice. I would highly recommend, for those of you who are interested, we have a series of discussions on this topic from, I think, the session number 82 onwards, where it goes into the specifics of inner life, and then we move to understanding what are the distinctive features of the integral yoga, and then we go into the actual integral yoga itself and its sevenfold framework, but with in each of those things a starting point of application for those aspects of the framework. I think it goes all the way to 105, if I remember right. That would be worthwhile to really understand. So what I see here, for example, what he's describing is, you observe all these habits, desires, emotions and thoughts which pop up, and you learn to calm them. Great, good training, good base. And then what? What is it that's going to change those thoughts? What is it that's going to direct them? What is it that's going to amplify, organize, intensify, direct, master? That's not implicit in this effort. Being aware, being able to watch, separate and calm is good starting point. From there now you must acquire a control. You must be able to direct thoughts, refuse thoughts, focus on a specific thought to the exclusion of all else, and then to be able to build coordinated action around specific purposes in which all the different parts of your awareness are fully, entirely, one-pointedly directed, and etc. This would be another aspect. Amplifying the power aspect of that to make more effective, etc. There will be another aspect which is becoming conscious, not just of the thoughts which pop up and desires which pop up, but where are they coming from? Are you even aware that the thought actually sailed into you, or the desire came into you from outside? Can you sense that entering actually? And then can you deal with it, block it, remove, modify, whatever else? Or make everything very still and quiet, or maybe even totally silent, and reach out to receive a still higher intuition, inspiration, thought, impulse, guidance, whatever it is, and let that flow through part by part and into expression of action. I'm just showing you the whole lot of things one could be working upon to do. What is described here is largely what would be the line of action prescribed in the ascetic paths of spirituality. So you go into typically Buddhist or Advaita Vedantic, modern Advaita Vedantic practices. It's about calm, don't be disturbed, become quiet, things, this too shall pass. It's all great. But when you're in a battlefield, you don't sit back and say, hey, this too shall pass. You get killed. And maybe you don't mind because this too shall pass, because life itself is purposeless. But if the purpose is in the integral yoga to manifest a greater truth, in which you are on a battleground to defend that truth, to assert it, and to overcome the falsehood that is against it, then you have to be battling. And for that battle, the skill has to be built up. And nowhere in this I'm seeing the effort of building skills and capacities. It's one thing to become aware of things happening within you. It's another thing to now take those things and build and develop those skills to become master of yourself. And master not just being able to control and hold calm, but in amplifying action to be effective, and for that you have to be in the battlefield. And for that you have to be in engagement with other people. You have to be in engagement with challenges, with engagement with crisis situations sometimes. That's when your capacities are tested, and that's when you're required to make that extra effort to push a skill, push a capacity, or even in mastering and calming, to master and calm a really powerful impulse of anger, pain, suffering, distress, fear, panic. And then can you deal with that? And even modify it, change it, etc. Or in that state hold what is called sang-froid in French, cold blood, not be affected and still focus on the thing you have to do despite the most intense pain that you might be in or fear that you might be in. So these are the circumstances of life in which then you can build all this. But most important, I'm still coming on this word skill. To be effective in action, in skill. So there is physical action, there could be a vital emotional action, there could be even a pure power force action, there could be a mind action, and so on. So all these we have to consciously develop and master. There's actually a question which is pending, we'll have to keep for later, from Maya, who asks, how do you develop this genius power of the Ashtavadhanam, the 8 capacities that Ganapati Muni or others have demonstrated? We'll have to look at that separately because it's a more complex question. But it's in this direction that I'm looking at this whole challenge. And this too is part of the integral yoga and the sadhana. Though nowhere here we are talking of spirituality. But from this now, if this entire process can be aligned to the psychic influence, if this can then be turned also to a higher intuitive influence, that's when we have got into the actual process of the integral yoga's sadhana proper. Otherwise it's just self-development. It's not yoga, it's not even integral yoga. So that being said, I'm also a bit troubled by this observation Luke makes to, though I intend not to focus too much on the physical world. Why? Think about it. And that's perhaps one of the reasons why there has not been sufficient engagement and development of certain capacities. Is it because temperamentally you shrink from it? Or is it because you feel that that is a more spiritual approach to not engage too much with the physical world? So in either case, you will have to make a correction. For the integral yoga, of course, we want to bring all the way down to the physical. But if there is a shrinking that represents a certain lack in capacity, fear, whatever it is, which you will have to eventually overcome. Because you want to be a powerful instrument for the divine action to manifest on earth. So how will you do that? Well, take small steps. If you have fear, take small steps. I'm not going to go too much into this, but I'm giving a direction broadly of the big picture. And so, then there's the comment about the general progress, integral progress, being sincere as possible to the presence, participation for more harmony. Yeah, that's good. It's again that very quietistic, very much aligned to the ascetic path. For purpose of harmony, you kind of settle down, you suppress things, you calm, you let go, you become a doormat effectively, so that to maintain harmony somehow. And I found this so much happening even in the ashram community, the Sri Aurobindo ashram, and I've seen some self-styled teachers making comments like, oh, for the purpose of harmony, you should be able to suppress your ego, you should be able to keep quiet, you should be able to adjust to others. Yes, of course, that's a basic training to be able to hold back and etc. But for purpose of harmony, if the other person is pushing forward a perversion and an untruth, will you for purpose of harmony let go and become quiet? That's a falsehood. You will have to engage at some point against a perversion and an untruth. And at that point, you will have to face disharmony, cause disharmony if needed, and even overcome the untruth by a battle, a struggle, a conflict. So what is this focus on harmony? What is the harmony we are speaking of? If we are speaking of a divine harmony, that's not a balance of forces, it's not an adaptation to compromise. That's a very different thing. That harmony has a different meaning. But this harmony is pointless and often a very dangerous path to inertia and self-destruction. This is the stick with which generally in India today, particularly the Hindu tradition, is being beaten with the stick by saying, oh, Gandhi is father of your nation, and Gandhi said for peace you should be able to compromise and even let yourself die, kill yourself if needed, suffer without complaint, and that you should do for purpose of harmony. And this is kind of strongly ingrained. Don't fight, step back, give up space until you're completely crushed, swamped, destroyed, thrown out, whatever it is. This exaggerated and wrong focus on harmony is a very dangerous thing, and you will have to review this point. So, sorry, I've gone into a few things which are not central to the question, but now I come to the question itself. So he says, I have the impression that there are other stratas, other gradations of concrete worlds, but hidden from me. So here's an interesting observation. You have an impression that they are there, but they are hidden. Observe carefully where this impression comes from. If you followed the earlier exercises which I had recommended, following Sri Aurobindo's teaching obviously, but I had recommended specific forms in which that could be put into practice for developing of the intuition. Again, we have 7 talks on this. I don't remember which is the sequence, but maybe just before the 60s, in the 60s numbers, you'll see 7 talks on higher levels of consciousness and how to develop intuition. If you've done some of that kind of work already, and again, that work you would do in the midst of activity of life, in interaction with people, in interaction with challenges and surprises of circumstances. If you've worked a little bit on this, then you will notice already you have a familiarity of that feel when there's an intuitive mix in an idea that comes. So an idea pops up. Is it coming from my fear? Is it coming from past habit? Is it coming from intuition? Or is it an intuition that's using an existing habit impulse? Or is it a habit impulse that has crept inside an intuition and warped it? You will notice this. And this is the real discipline, the training for you to develop the intuitive the ability to access intuition and work with it. And so you have an impression of other stratas. If you can catch the intuitive component of it, you can actually focus on that exclusive focus and begin to feel that grade, that strata already as a thing in itself. So I'm showing you, you have actually the first touch available. Focus on that. For this, you have to build up the capacity to focus your consciousness. So here's one more skill which one has to develop if you want to really explore this in some detail. Develop the capacity to put your entire awareness on a particular grade of consciousness and be aware in that fully, entirely, almost exclusively. And then to be able to distinguish between gradations and then able to move between gradations. If you work on this a little bit, and it's not difficult, then you'll find you're able to distinguish a particular grade of influence of consciousness. So notice, for example, and we'll take an example which is just at random. You have a particular quality of thoughts or emotions that come, and they come frequently. Focus on that grade, catch that grade until you're fully in that grade and feel what it's like to live in that alone. And perhaps it's not too high, but it comes frequently. So now you're familiar, you have an access to something which is familiar. From there, now shift your attention to a poise where the mind separates from this and stands by itself pure and free from this mixture of emotions, for example. Shift now and hold that poise purely and stay in it and experience the same world, the same experience of yourself and the same challenge problem before you from that poise. Now you've experienced from 2 different poises. Once habituated now, from this poise slide down to the other poise, from the lower poise slide back into the higher poise. Very simple exercise. It demands almost entire exclusive focus of concentration, awareness, and it's almost entirely done internally to you. You can be just sitting there and doing it. Nothing else required. As a tool of self-control, self-mastery, but more than that, access to gradations of consciousness and worlds. It's amazing as a starting point. You do this, everything else from there becomes potentially accessible. Now you go into nature, you feel the life energy, plants. Tune in to the largely dominant grade of energy. And again tune in into that exclusivity. And in that you open out and feel the plant consciousness or the life force in the plant of that space perhaps. Again, simple exercise. Once you've done that first thing, this becomes easy. And then begin to now observe how when you enter a space, multiple gradations of influence act upon you. What are those gradations? You don't have to have names, just notice. And you'll find naturally a kind of a sequence of hierarchy of gradations. What is mixed? Sometimes there's a mind mixed with emotions, etc. Otherwise, you'll notice without words. Observe, it's hitting me on these 2 or 3 points, gradations. Observe simply. So you're now beginning to feel the invasion of a grade of consciousness into you as a thing in itself. Not yet objectively a world as you would be in an out-of-body state. But now you have an access to the world as it is in the way organized in the material experience. That's your key. So without objectifying it as in an out-of-body state, you begin to recognize gradations of consciousness in different spaces that you go to. And if you've been able to make that shift internally between 2 states, you come into this space, you feel this, and then make the shift. And then see if having shifted to a different grade, you can actually open out and invoke something of that grade. So these are very simple exercises, but engaging with things, engaging with people then. You notice someone is at a particular grade, you tune into that, and then you shift your level higher and perhaps drag their level up. Notice what happens. Or you find them at this grade, you tune in and sense they have something else on a different grade, tap into that, amplify that, reach out to that, draw upon that by conversation, by interaction, hook there. And you notice somehow they shift into that level. They were depressed, you did the interaction, and suddenly they come out, oh, it's gone, what happened? So these are just simple experiments where you have first the sense of strata as well as objectivity, concreteness of these domains in kind of a universal capacity within you, external to you, and the interactions between them. If this you are able to do, you have already a sufficient skill and mastery on this in this capacity that when you go out of the body, you can just shift levels, gradations, tap into, draw upon. But you don't even need to go out of the body for this. And the objectivity of those worlds you will feel. You go into a space, you will feel, here this particular gradation is very strong. And for whatever reason, you may tune in or tune out, you may choose to do what you like. But equally, you will develop the power to invoke, to amplify, to intensify a certain grade. And this, of course, we're talking of lower gradations. When you tune into still higher gradations, you can draw down as if, invoke a higher quality, presence, and so on. So, with this, you have the very objective experience of the strata, but also internally subjectively as well as externally objectively. And the two then, and the interaction between the two can be worked upon. But again, for this, I would highly recommend not to do this in pure isolation. Some basic exercise you do, and then you engage with life, engage with people, engage with challenges of life and circumstances, and notice how these things play out. Observe people when they act in those difficult circumstances. And you notice this person has an extraordinary ability to, for example, overcome problems, overcome misunderstandings. And you notice what the person is doing, at what level they are tapping, what kind of power, force, quality that they are activating, how they engage with people, and what level they pull, push to bring about a certain state of harmony. Or there are others who, wherever they go, they create chaos. And you notice what is it that is doing it, and you start tapping or dealing with that situation because you're conscious of it. So here, without an out-of-body experience, you can develop a very great objective, subjective skill, power, capacity to engage with these worlds. When it comes to now the last part, which is the example of Sujata going to Sri Aurobindo's house in the subtle physical every night. It's not difficult. The problem is of remembering. Had you perhaps asked Sujata, hey, mother said you are doing this, do you remember? She might perhaps have said, I don't remember, I'm not conscious, but it's happening. There's an example the mother gave of a child who was in the school who would drift off into sleep in the middle of class, and the teachers used to complain, and at some point they got very upset. One of the teachers went to the mother and said, this boy is always sleeping. And apparently, this is a story I've heard. So mother said apparently to that teacher that, but when he's sleeping, his psychic being is coming to me. So don't disturb him, let him be. Now, it's possible that this is happening, but it does not mean the child is conscious of it. It doesn't mean the child is doing it consciously. So here comes the real part. You want to do that, go into the subtle physical domain and go to the ashram, subtle physical ashram, and to Sri Aurobindo and the mother. You can do that. And the method would be to put yourself in that intention, one-pointed. If you can tune into the grade where you want to particularly experience, put that intention and slide into sleep with that intention focused in that grade. For example, that is one way you would do. Otherwise, simply put an intention and go to sleep. But that's not enough, because you might actually have an experience and come back with no memory of it. You have to put the intention of the recall of memory and the continuity of the memory on return. And so it's something to be worked on. We have discussed in the series of discussions on out-of-body experience and dreams and visions. But it's not difficult. The point is more of being conscious in that out-of-body state. And I do not know how much Sujata herself might have been conscious on the return. Of course, she might have been in that state. So I think I broadly have covered Luke's question and the many aspects of the question. I appreciate your questions, very challenging and practical and interesting. So I picked these questions now because it aligns perfectly well with the theme for today, where we're going to read now Sri Aurobindo's text in the chapter 22, the next couple of paragraphs. Look at the text which we covered the last two times, where Sri Aurobindo highlighted that there has to be sufficient individualization to be able to persist. But individualization of what? And the ability of the soul as it evolves to be able to assert itself over its nature and not be dependent on its nature, but to be able to hold itself on its own without being bound to that material. So he says, first, you have to be able to subsist in the subtle body, particularly in this case the subtle physical, as you emerge from the gross body in the time of separation from the body or death. So you are at that point in the subtle physical. That must be sufficiently individualized. Second, the true person within the psychic or the soul must have its own individuality to be able to hold its own position along with the vital, along with the subtle physical. Okay, these two are essential requirements for survival after death. Otherwise, you have to either take birth immediately or tendency to dissipate will work. And then after that, beyond that, to be able to then survive and do something worthwhile, useful, you have to have the sufficient individualization of the vital and the mental bodies. So now 4 requirements in this sequence. First subtle physical, then the soul individuality, then the vital and mental organization or ability to hold its own. But at this point he says it's not enough, because if you just have that, you reincarnate, you're carrying the same vital and mental. A further maturing has to happen where you should be able to discard even elements of the vital and mental without losing yourself in the process. So effectively, the soul, which is now using the support of the biology or the subtle gradations of body to hold individuality, now should have come into sufficient individuality of its own that it can hold itself without those things. Now remember, all of this is essential as steps of evolution, but also for you to be able to hold your individuality when out of the body. And so a lot of this can be put into practice during your daytime, and particularly persisting in holding this poise of awareness and separation in the mind, for example, as the observer status, and organizing your thoughts around that central aspiration that you hold, which is aligned to the soul, for example, or similarly with your emotions. So basic practices of that kind would help to build this. And then he says, so individualization of the psychic person, and even discarding the elements of the mental or vital, it should be able to hold that. And what you hold and what you have developed then would determine where you are after when you leave the body, what level, what gradation, what worlds, etc. So the moment you have this ability to hold on to your own, separate from the biology, as soon as you leave the body, you will tend to drift to a certain gradation, because that's the tendency. But you're a complex mix, so which gradation? Well, the one which is most dominant, which is the most prominent at that point, and we discussed that last time. And so there's also an oscillation, shifting of gradations possible, and there will be tendencies to bind to the lower because of strong attachment to some physical form by habit or by persistent tendency, while you're in the vital body because the vital had that, or while you're in the mental body because the mental had that, etc. But the key point on which we ended, there's a clear relationship between the state of consciousness in which you live life in the biology and the state in which you are when you're separated from the biology. And that state determines the direction after death, determines the place, the duration, and the character of experience of whatever it is, domains that you enter. So now, what are these domains? This is the theme for today, and 2 paragraphs which cover this. The first paragraph, he is describing the annexes to the worlds, and the next paragraph describes the worlds in themselves. So in the topic for today, as a subtitle, I have put these keywords: constructed versus original worlds. So when you first enter those domains, you are much more in the constructed worlds. As those constructions dissolve, you enter much more in the original worlds as they actually are, quite objectively. So these are the two paragraphs he's going to cover, and it's very important for us to understand and appreciate this, because again, the nature of the constructed worlds would largely depend on how you have lived your life, in what state, in what formations, with what beliefs, etc. And that would be a major delay. If you have built up strong beliefs, you are pulled into the constructions of those beliefs, and that's a delay for your soul to be able to then free itself and enter the actual worlds, after which it will actually go to the soul world. So all of these are steps following the withdrawal from the biology through which one passes. So we'll see the text now. So we saw how you will tend to, according to the relationship of your current evolution, you will tend to drift to a certain grade of worlds. It, that is the soul, it may be also that he may linger for a time in one of those annexes of the other worlds created by his habitual beliefs or by the type of his aspirations in the mortal body. So he is the person who, having left the body. So two things he is referring to. Habitual beliefs. It's not just a belief, it's a habitual belief, meaning you've gone over it again and again and again until without trying the belief sits on you. So for example, you can believe that some statement was made about something, that tomorrow they will be announcing this. Yeah, I believe, yeah, of course they will do it. It's a casual belief, one time passing thing. But look at a person going through, let's say, psychological problems. There's a habitual belief often, and you'll see this in often young children who will go through stress of exam. I am not capable of this. I am not good enough for this. I do not deserve this. Very subtle distinction between these three, but very important in consequence. Okay, observe these three. All of us have at least one of these, maybe multiple of these, in some matter or other. So the moment you say this, I'm not capable, for example, that belief repeated multiple times becomes your reality to the extent that it forms you and prevents you from actually doing it. I'm going to say this, it's a bit embarrassing, but there was a time when in the school I was writing. The teacher just gave us topics, we wrote, and these were some of the most beautiful writings I personally think of my whole life. They were at a young age, relatively, probably 16 or something. Very creative, very beautiful, idealistic. I wrote poetry of all kinds. That notebook eventually was discarded, and it was a great pity that I still feel pain about. But subsequently, we had a teacher, and for some reason this fellow picked on me, and anything I wrote, he would ridicule it and read out passages and laugh at it and ridicule. To the point that because we had him at least 2 or 3 years, I developed the conviction that I was incapable of writing good, whatever, articles or text. And it's in sharp contrast to what I had done before, which I knew was of very high grade. But in those 2 or 3 years, I believed it. And as a result, I stopped writing. One time I made a special effort because I saw what he was praising. He was praising somebody who would write absolute rubbish. But it was very highfalutin vocabulary and praising meaninglessly. And I said, I'll try that. So I wrote something. And somewhere along the way, at the end, there was one word I was trying to get a rhythm, and I couldn't quite get the right word. I got the wrong word because of the rhythm that I was trying to catch. So that particular class, he read everybody's notebook. He said everybody was so good. He kept mine last. He said, this is amazing. He said, you were doing so well, and then you got to this word, and it was such a disaster. And he blew it out of proportion and threw everything else I had done. And I remember at that point something in me went, wham, never again I'm going to write. And it was a very powerful formation. It prevented me from writing for a long time, for years. Until at some point I was forced to, when my teacher left his body, I was forced to write, and I started doing, and then I started a series on science in Sri Aurobindo and things like that in the service letter. And one day, one of the very senior teachers in the ashram school, he said, you write very well, you have a gift. And I said, is that true? And with that, the original faith and trust began to return. And I look back at that formation which this teacher hammered into me by ridiculing again and again. And the formation was so strong, I had become a part of that belief. It had become my reality. I'm unable to write well. I had similar issues with handwriting. For years, the teachers would hammer away saying, dirty handwriting, ugly handwriting. I said, okay, that's how it is. That's how I am. I can't help it. And then one teacher said, no, you write very well when you write slowly. It becomes more illegible when you write fast because you're thinking faster than your hand can keep up with. And when she said that, wow, what an insight. And I understood it was true. And it gave me the necessary correction. So I'm showing you how a formation could actually become so real to you that you live it and you are formed by it and you're trapped in it. I've given examples which are relatively superficial. But now when that formation becomes, I am sinful, I am worthy of punishment, I have failed God, whatever. These things come in many of the Abrahamic traditions because they hammer away the idea of guilt and of failure and of insufficiency. You're born in sin, you're going to, etc. It's hammered on you. The sense of guilt is so deeply ingrained, and I've seen this especially, and I didn't realize how bad it was until I traveled in the West. And I had people saying, for years I've lived with this fear and guilt formation that came from the church. And I'm only now beginning to slowly accept that this is not true and I don't need to live in it. And I give one extreme example. This was shared by one of the persons who was in Aurobindo. And she said her father had actually broken away from the church, rejected everything because of this fear-guilt trip. But at the end of his life, when he was about to leave his body, the sickness had reached a limit, he called for a priest and went through the ritual of confession. And then he told his daughter, well, just in case. And the daughter gave this as an example of how powerful these formations can be. You have, at least on the surface, rejected everything and you don't believe in anything of that stuff. But when it came to the crisis, the last challenge of what's next, I don't know, well, just in case it's true, that means the formation was always there. You're still rooted, you're still bound in that formation. Such is the power of some of these religious beliefs, particularly. But if religions can create such strong beliefs, equally non-religion or science, or the religion of science, if we may call it that, can equally create those powerful beliefs. And sometimes they're so strong, even to make you fall sick, or to hold you in sickness. And that comes from a lot of the programming through the global pharmaceutical industry. The programming tells you, you do this, you'll fall sick, you do that, you'll get well. And it's a formation again. So I'm giving you a few more radical and extreme examples of habitual beliefs. And the key word here is habit. A habitual belief, because it is bound in the repetition of the habit, now becomes constant without you being consciously aware of it, therefore more powerful. So any habitual belief that you have, any kind, is a formation. It may be good, it may be bad, doesn't matter. It's still a formation that is limiting and binding you and creates an entire world. One more thing he puts, habitual beliefs and by the type of his aspirations in the mortal body. Now this is something even more subtle but equally powerful. What was your life's prime driver of aspirations? So let's say as a child you were told, oh, you have to become rich, you have to be wealthy, you have to master, you have to overcome, you have to conquer, you have to beat the others, you have to be first. Well, that's been hammered to a point where that becomes your tendency of your nature. So the poor fellow, running after the next for what? Name, fame, wealth, comfort, money, whatever it is. But he's chasing. I'll give an example. I put it in a way that I protect the identity. At some point I met somebody who was of, let's say, in the nation among the top 10 in terms of structures of power. Through some friend, and I had occasion, I went to meet him. It was in the New Delhi at North Block or South Block, I don't remember which one. And I was taken in through reached his office. This is the top of the entire hierarchy of that particular organization. And the man I genuinely respect for what he next did. He said to me, all my life I have been chasing this next promotion. Now that I'm at the top, I suddenly realize what more? And there's nothing more. I don't know what to do. And then he said, now I'm going to retire in another 1 or 2 years. I don't know what to do. There's no sense of purpose, no sense of direction, nothing to look forward to chase after, to... You see where it goes. Now, if that was the drive for years and years and years, now watch what happens. Suddenly you stop, there's nothing more to do. You have this emptiness. But now put the same situation before you reach that top, your life ends. You're thrown out of the body. And suddenly what happens? The same impulse which was driving, chasing after whatever it was, continues and creates a world around it. So, what are these type of aspirations in the mortal body? What is it you're really chasing after? What is it that for you is important? What is it for you that you are implicitly chasing after? It's not explicit, it's not always conscious. You want to be accepted, you want to be liked, you want to be loved, you want to be superior, you want to dominate, you want to own, you want to possess. And it could be very implicit. On the front, you might be very generous. You will see sometimes businessmen, they will very generous, but internally the primary drive is not of that. It's about that assertion or this fear or this lack which they are trying to fill by chasing. So the cases could be any number of complexity. I'm just giving you an idea of how to recognize this. What are your drives? What are your aspirations while in the mortal body? And the most persistent core drives, habitual beliefs and the type of his aspiration in the mortal body, these create entire worlds which are annexes of the worlds that you're going to enter. So what is an annex? Annex is a house which is attached to a larger house. It's joined, it's as if a part, it's an appendage almost, but it's like it's not the real thing. It's a small thing attached to the bigger thing. So the bigger real world is there. That's the true world of the vital, of whatever gradation. And you have an annex which is created by your own strong habitual belief and type of aspiration which you've lived and driven by for all these years in the mortal body, and that creates the world in which you are now out of the body, after death of the body. What happens there? You live those habitual beliefs, you relive those aspirations again and again in a complex, rich, detailed world, so complete that you'll be convinced you're in it. It is yours. It is the world as it is out around you. So let's say now, you take an example of let's say a military warrior. He's in battleground, hiding from the enemy. He's convinced the enemy is on the other side. If he pops his head up, he'll get shot. He's hiding in fear. Anytime the enemy could find him and he'll be killed. He's living in that fear. And there's a bomb, body is blown out, he's not even aware, he's in his subtle body. He continues to relive this. What happens now is for the next months, years, doesn't matter what, he's still living in that fear and terror. Oh, I might be caught, I have to eat now, and there's no food, what do I do? Oh, there's that little snack which is now rotten after so many days, and that's all I have left to eat. And he eats that. And he eats that, and he eats that again and again and again, weeks, months, years, all in the subtle body. And all that snack is created from his own fear and expectation and desire or sense of self-insufficiency. I am a useless fellow. I deserve this suffering. I deserve this pain. I deserve to be in the hell. And you create the hell around you that you feel you deserve to be in. Or that you fear most. What if I end up in the hell? And that idea and that obsession and fear builds the hell that you fear. And you live in that. For how long? Depending on the strength of the formation, it could last long. Of course, there could be help from outside which will pull you out, which will break that, etc. But how strong is the formation is the tendency for the thing to stay on. So, It may be also that he may linger for a time in one of those annexes of the other worlds created by his habitual beliefs or by the type of his aspirations in the mortal body. We know that he creates images of these superior planes, which are often mental translations of certain elements in them, and erects his images into a system, a form of actual worlds. So, if you've all read Savitri and the description of the passages of Ashwapati going through these worlds, while reading, you've created an image. In your mind, you've created a sequence of a hierarchy of how you'll move across them. Or if inside a religious system, you've been taught there is this, and this is what happens. So you've created those images. Now, the moment you open your eyes, that creative power of the mind, builds those images. And you find yourself in those images. So what they do is, the images are of superior planes, but mental translations of certain elements in them. So let me ask you, what do you think would a higher vital world be like, where everything is beautiful and enjoyable and perhaps pleasurable and comfortable and fun? You have immediately an idea of what it could be like. Well, that's your image. And it corresponds to a certain truth of it, but it's not it. That is completely different. What is actually there you cannot even imagine, because your imagination is too limited to the nature of the material life. You have only replicated that here. So if you see, for example, in one of the Abrahamic traditions, paradise is full of perfumed streams, and you have so many beautiful girls who are waiting for you. Now, you've got this image of paradise. So you come in a physical world. You know what happened with some of the Middle Eastern invaders when they came to India. They said, "Oh, if there is heaven, it is here on earth. It is here, it is here." They said, when they saw water flowing was part of the image of paradise. Having lived in the desert, that was paradise. And then you fill in the rest. You get the virgins that you want to add to complete your image of paradise. Now, this is a very strong formation. I'm taking this actually because there is a huge number of people who have this as their formation of paradise. So going out of the body, if they think they are in paradise, this is the image they create. What follows next? Well, you live in that. Or if you had the guilt, most of your life you have done things which you call sinful, for which you are convinced you will be punished and you deserve to be punished, well, you've created the equivalent images of hell that you have read about or thought about. Now you see what in all these images, you have taken earth experience and as if patched that onto some principle or element of that. Oh, the perfumed paradise, everything would be perfumed and more beautiful than I can imagine. Okay, so you just take the earth scene and make it somewhat more beautiful. You see what people are doing with AI today. You can create unearthly, almost unreal scenes, and they look like other worlds, but it's still not of the nature of the other worlds, because the experience is so different. Substance itself is as if conscious. If you go high enough, the stream is made of conscious substance flowing. You can't replicate that in your imagination because you're still putting earth images onto those. So he creates images of those superior planes, which are often mental translations of certain elements in them, and erects his images into a system, a form of actual worlds. He builds up also desire worlds of many kinds, to which he attaches a strong sense of inner reality. So all these are being built up. Desire worlds. Consider what are the primary desires that you indulge in. All of us have. For some it is food, some it is sex, for some it is power play, for some it is some interaction, social, whatever. Whatever that primary character of the desire that you have, how much of, let's say, dreams of the night would relate to those? It gives you a glimpse of what happens when you are in that state. This is what you live for, this is what you live by, this is your dominant theme of the life energy, vitality. Well, that's what you end up with. That's the world you have created. So, and you give to it a strong inner reality. It is possible that these constructions may be so strong as to create for him an artificial post-mortal environment in which he may linger. So maybe the construction is weak, momentarily you're there, oh wow, paradise, so nice, and maybe you move on, or it dissolves and then something else comes. But if it's so strong that you're actually trapped in it, you could stay for quite a while. And sometimes it could be years, it could even be centuries. 4. The image-making power of the human mind, its imagination, which is in his physical body only an indispensable aid to his acquisition of knowledge and his life creation, may in a higher scale become a creative force which would enable the mental being to live for a while amid its own images until they were dissolved by the soul's pressure. So 3 important ideas here. First, the place of imagination, the power of image making of the human mind in the normal life, is that it is an indispensable aid to acquisition of knowledge. If you don't have imagination, you cannot acquire knowledge. It is indispensable. So development of power of imagination is an essential component for training your mind to be able to acquire knowledge, at least while in the body, by using the material processes of knowledge. In fact, what I've seen generally, it's one of those things which I will simply leave it as a personal observation, but it's very, very true because I've tested it really for decades. The people who have the ability to conceive and visualize, imagine powerfully, in a rich detail, almost in 3 dimensions, are those who tend to have a higher IQ. So it may be part of a discussion we may have another time about the power of amplifying powers of mind. I remember reading one of the greatest physicists is his famous lectures of I forget his name now. One of the greatest physicists, some man. Okay, so in his book, in his autobiography, he describes how, as a young student, he would go to his seniors in the domain of maths or physics and challenge them. And the challenge was, he'd say, tell me any theorem and I will tell you if it is true or false. And they would tell him something very complex and he would say true, or he would say false, and it would be always right. How did he know? And he explains that as they would describe the theorem, he would build within his mind a model of what they were describing. And if the model fitted the conclusion, he said, this is true. And when he said that, I said, wow, that's interesting, because that's exactly what I was doing, which made me excel compared to others in physics or maths or other things. The power of the mind to be able to form a model instantly with rich detail was one of the critical features which made for a higher IQ. Okay, and he was doing exactly that. And he gives an example of how, so at some point when he said this is wrong, they said, no, it's correct as a theorem. He said, but then they got into detail and he said, it has to be of infinitesimal size. I said, oh, but you didn't mention that, therefore I was right. For what you defined, it was wrong. So there were little details, if mentioned, the model will change instantly to match what you're being described. So this is the power of imagination. It is essential for any deep knowledge. So for those of you who are interested, train it, and it's very easy to train. You should be able to visualize in 3 dimensions. You should be able to turn, look from inside out. And I trained myself to visualize in 4 dimensions, and I was pushing my mind to visualize in 5 dimensions. 4 was not too difficult, 5 was really challenging, but with exceptional cases I could. For example, you visualize a cube, then take it to 4th dimension, what would it be like? And then you rotate the cube. That's really hard. And there are actually six directions that you can rotate the cube at. 4 directions you could rotate the cube, and the 4th would be the 4th dimensional rotation. To visualize that it's interesting, and I took the analogy from 2 dimension to 3 dimension to teach my mind to go 3 to 4. Now all this it's not difficult. It's just not taught in the school. And I could someday, I hope to do a special training class to train people to do this, and it's really helpful because it prepares you by opening to the higher faculties of your mind, which faculties would be critical as vehicles for the higher intuition. Because the more you go into higher domains of knowledge, the more the essential abstraction of knowledge, consciousness and form is the theme. And if your mind is not familiarized to those abstractions and freedom from form and made supple enough to be free of form, you cannot receive the knowledge as it comes in its purity. You will tend always to condense, reduce, and distort it into what fits within your 3D capacity of visualization or conception. So pushing that boundary is critical if you really want to train for higher quality of knowledge to be received in the mind through the intuition or other means. So I've digressed a little bit, but I want to explain this. It's very important to appreciate that without the power of imagination, you cannot have acquisition of knowledge while in the body. So in physical life, imagination is only an indispensable aid to acquisition of knowledge and life creation. So this is the other feature. The same imagination allows you to create models for actualizing, for manifesting, for giving life to. So it's for acquiring knowledge, but also for expressing and giving life to a certain idea, purpose, impulse, etc. So that's the role of imagination in our normal physical life. First point. Second point, this power of imagination in the physical life is limited to this, but actually on a higher scale it can become a creative force which would enable the mental being to live for a while amid its own images. Now, it's the same power now shifted to a higher plane. Let's say you're daydreaming. We don't need to go out of the body for that. You daydream and fully immerse yourself in this imaginative world, down to every little detail. Visualize. Let's say pick something which for you is natural. You go to a very beautiful garden. You step into that world, and everywhere there are flowers, beautiful perfumes. Each flower is glowing. Now give them colors, give them details, make them alive, make them move. Put some music and let them dance to the rhythm of the music by slow drifting of the petals. So you're creating a world that you have never seen. And yet it corresponds to some deep truth of the higher worlds that resonates and makes you now fill with your earthly representation of what those higher worlds might be like. That's your power of the imagination. Now, I would actually take you through, could do a whole half-hour process of going into details and conceiving of this, to a point where it's such a beautiful feeling and scene that you could stay in that and just daydream. So this is typically what people do in a lot of the new age, what they call guided meditations, visualizations, to make you feel relaxed, to make you feel good, to make you feel happy, etc. But it's construction. Be very clear about that. But the construction is, once out of the body, instant, richly detailed to every extreme, to the tiniest detail, even a tiny ant on the wall, a tiny flaw in the paint, and all that would be instantly produced by the mind. If for those of you who have read Mark Obern's first book, 0.001%, where he describes the transition from outer body state to dream state and back. So he is describing this airport scene, and you have hundreds of people bustling, moving around, and a rich detail of complexity. And being in an out-of-body state, you're simultaneously intensely aware of it all. And he's aware that it's actually created by his own mind. And he breaks out of it and comes back to his out-of-body state. Everything goes out. It's like a bubble dissolved. And then again, because he's tending to drift into dream, he describes how from above, the image flows down, enters his mind, and suddenly the whole scene opens up, and he is now in his dream, like a bubble of dream. But it is purely his own, uniquely individual to him. For somebody who's outside looking at you, say in and out of body state, they'll find you lost in your bubble of daydream, literally a physical shape in which your scenery is being created by your mind. If they have the skill, they can peek into what you're experiencing and imagining, or even participate in it, or even enter your dream bubble and play with it and modify it, or dissolve it, or break it, or anything. And this is what the mother, you will remember, tried to do to help Kennedy when he was shot, to break out of his bubble of beliefs which were formed by his Catholic background. And she said she couldn't help. He was too stuck in it. So this is the second element, that this power of imagination, when out of the body, becomes incredibly all-powerful, enough to hold you in a full simulation of a three-dimensional movie state, so to say. You're watching a movie, but it's three-dimensional, it's all around with all rich details. To whatever detail you want, your mind fills in instantly. That's the creative power of the mind. And that's why in the physical body, when you say imagine something, doesn't change much because biology is rigid. In the subtle body, you imagine it and instantly form changes to shape it. So anyone who has a lucid dream, this is one of the first things you do. You're conscious in your dream, okay, now let me change my reality. Put a wall here, change this shape, whatever it is. And it instantly changes. This creative power is natural to substance which is malleable in the higher worlds. When it comes to the biology, it's not instant, but it is still all powerful in the parts of physical material which are open to mind. And this is why imagination can help you cure and heal or even to kill. Because it acts even in the physical world, but the response is slower and to the more receptive and subtle parts, more mentalized parts. But it's still as powerful. And that's why you will see in out-of-body states, certain things which here, mantras for example, can have a tremendous power, creative power. You speak a mantra, you speak Om, and instantly the entire state of the world, the shape, content, the color, substance, mood, changes, transforms, you shift levels, anything can happen instantly. That's the power of the mantra. You come into the physical body, you say the same mantra 1,000 times, nothing changed. Of course there's a shift, but it is in the psychological domain or the parts which are responsive to the psychological. So this is the second aspect of the image-making power of the mind. While in the physical world it has this limited use, in the higher worlds, in the higher scale, may become a creative force which would enable the mental being to live for a while amid its own images until, and this is the third component of this part, until they were dissolved by the soul's pressure. So who is the real person, who is the real master of that situation? And the soul's pressure eventually can dissolve these formations. Otherwise, thrown out of the body, you get lost into these annex worlds of your own creation, bubbles. And it is to this that Mark repeatedly, disdainfully says, dreamers, world of dreamers. And this is what we are seeing when we are actually in a dream state, wandering outside the body, in our subtle body, but in a dream state. But the reality is that dream state is a replica of our daily walking in the body state. You get out of your house. Let's say you're walking to go to some place. What's your internal condition? You are in a dream state. You're lost in the world of your imaginations, of your beliefs, of your worries, of your concerns. You're not even conscious of what's happening around you except in a mechanical way. And the proof of this, very simple. You watch somebody walking. Stop them and ask, what were you thinking of just now? First, the shock of the stop has broken the chain. So the guy says, oh, nothing. Oh, but you were thinking because I saw you making some expressions on your face. I don't remember. That's how bad it is. When actually a person is consciously thinking and there's a chain consciously created, you stop him halfway and you ask him, what were you thinking? He will be able to tell you, I was thinking of this. Right? If he is not able to tell you, that means he was not actively, consciously thinking. It was thought patterns rising, flowing, forming as in a dream state at night. So, the conclusion from this is, most people live in a dream bubble in their waking biology state. Therefore, at night, they continue the dream bubble in the out-of-body, subtle body state. And there's no difference. We are dreamers living in a fantasy of our own projections and creations of beliefs and habitual states. This is the mass of humanity. Dreamers. So, one of the basic practices for becoming conscious out of the body, break the dream. In the body, in the daytime. And so there are basic practices for that. You set a timer, or each time you remember, you look at your hand and say, am I dreaming? Is this a dream? If becoming conscious, if you're in a dream, you become conscious, you break the dream. the dreamlike state. And if you do that, it's interesting. You actually intensify your awareness. You're conscious of everything, using that as a point of awareness. Then watch what happens. Okay, I just did the exercise. Now you go back into the drowse, slide back into the sleep dream state, and you continue your mechanical life. And so in the night, in the middle of the night, you're repeating the same habit. Oh, I'm looking at my hands now. Am I dreaming? Oh, I've become conscious in my dream. Oh, I'm actually conscious. I'm dreaming. Oh, nice. And zoop, you go right back. Interesting. So one of the most important practices, one of the easiest practices to become lucid in your dream state, and it's not necessarily out of body, but just the lucid, is to become awake in your daytime, in the middle of activities, and to stay awake as long as possible. I remember when I was experimenting with this for a while, one of the biggest problems was I would have the lucid state in the lucid dream. Oh, I'm conscious, I'm in a dream. And I'm struggling to stay awake in the lucidity because the tendency of inertia to slide back into the dreaminess and loss of lucidity is so strong. And then I related it to the daytime state. Okay, so what will overcome this? There has to be something which is not this. So in your daytime, what is it? Practically nothing. In your nighttime also practically nothing. But when thrown out of the body, eventually something which is more true within you will slowly assert itself and begin to dissolve this. So until they were dissolved by the soul's pressure. Something more true, meeting something less true, less permanent, eventually the less permanent begins to crumble and dissolve. Or you notice, because of the pressure of the soul, hey, why is it the same pattern happening again and again? What is this? So, taking the example of the soldier in the trench who is convinced that he is still fighting after a few years, although the physical war has ended. He's eating this stale sandwich, which he is convinced is all he has. Isn't this exactly the same sandwich I had yesterday? Isn't this the same bite mark? Isn't it the same shape? What is it? Something is wrong. Reality is not okay. Something is repeating itself. Is this a joke? And you're at that point stepping back from your own thought processes and habits and dream pattern to question it. Just that is enough to create a slight tear in your bubble of dream and say, am I really dreaming? And if by then the soul pressure has come forward enough, you can pop out of it. Oh my God, this was actually a dream. I'm in my subtle body. Could be enough. Or you say, oh, something is wrong. I don't like this. I'm scared of something being wrong. And you go right back into the dream because it's so safe. So now, when we've described all this, look back at how much of your life is a programming to be in dream state. All of your education, all of your cinema, all of the music, all of the habits programmed upon you. You see these young people putting earphones and listening to music and going, it's a state of self-hypnosis. You've been taught to live a lifestyle of self-hypnosis or a hypnosis by the controllers, to live in the hypnotized state, which is sleep, in half-waking. All your habits, all your reactions, all your tendencies, all your drives are the programmed under hypnosis. I look at some of the movies today which are being projected, especially with young people, and the pictures they give you of the young people and the life which are given to you as the ideals. It's sometimes so sad, so disgusting. And I have that experience of sadness and disgusting because I had a childhood in which we were told beautiful stories of heroism, idealism and courage and said, you have to become like this. And those people who told us those stories, when they passed, they were grandmothers at that point. When they passed on, nobody replaced them. I'm speaking of the ashram school. Nobody replaced them. There was one Manoramadi. We had no TV in those days. So we would all accumulate around her, sit and she would tell stories. There was another Marathi lady, Limaye. She would tell these heroic stories. And with such passion, so much drama, you were inspired as children. But those stuck. They set you an ideal. And I look at children today and the cinema and the goals set by the cinema, drink alcohol, take drugs and casual sex, chase after pretty dresses, chase after some flashy goods. You are in the rat race programmed to just live there, bound in it. And then nothing higher. And so easy to manipulate and control. But you're living that hypnosis, you're living the dreamy sleep state, let's say, and that's what continues everywhere in the night. And after death, it continues. So the point I'm coming to, what were primary drives for your life are going to be the primary drives immediately after you leave the body. So you realize how important this culturing is, and the overall sense of culture and purpose of life that has been awakened or inculcated in you, and the values and the sense of self-respect. And I remember those words I said, I'm not good enough, I don't deserve this, or I cannot do this, etc. All those things which are embedded, which prevent you from breaking free of these worlds of your construction. So, until it is dissolved by the soul's pressure, something truer within eventually dissolves it. But now look at that happening in the subtle body versus the same thing happening in the physical body. In the subtle body, because the material is more plastic, it got dissolved, let's say, a few days or weeks or months down. But when you were in the physical body and you had these belief systems which were form of your bubble of daydream, the soul's pressure was also there. But the rigidity here made it that it takes years and years and years for you to overcome this. But still the soul pressure is there. Just the response in the materiality is so much slower. This is why we suffer so much. All of us, we inevitably go off track, inevitably make stupid decisions, chase after these fantasies and illusions. And the soul's pressure is there to help you break free. If you turn to feel it, you will get it immediately. If you ignore it in the passion of the chase, well, the soul pressure is there. It'll take you a few years before you wake up, eventually. So you understand the relationship between the in the body and outer body state after leaving the body. But soul's pressure is what will eventually overcome all these delusions and illusions. Now we continue with the text. You see, I'm highlighting all this because in giving examples, you understand how much Aurobindo is conveying in what might seem to be a very simple description. But you have to really look at the big picture and appreciate the nuances and interdependence of the whole text itself. All these buildings are of the nature of larger life constructions. In them, his mind translates some of the real conditions of the greater mental and vital worlds into terms of his physical experience, magnified, prolonged, extended to a condition beyond physicality. So you catch glimpses of what is true in those higher worlds. They actually are of the nature of the higher life, larger life constructions, but now plugged in the slower terms of the physical experience, but magnified, prolonged and extended to a condition beyond physicality. So beyond physicality, first is magnification. Everything is more intense, 1,000 times more intense. If you feel pain, it's 1,000 times more intense. If you have happiness, it is 1,000 times more intense. Pleasure, 1,000 times more intense. Prolonged, where in the physical body it might last a few seconds or minutes, there it could last weeks, months, years. And in a condition which is beyond the physicality. But still you'll get bored. Let's say you are chasing after pleasure. You're out of the body, you create your world of pleasure, intensify the pleasure all you want, and after a point what? You say, and then what? Eventually you will say, and then what? What more is there after this? There has to be something more. This is not satisfying me anymore because I just had it for as long as I wanted for free. Nothing prevents you from having any experience when out of the body. So having had all the experiences you can have easily which would match your physical desires, then you say, and then what? You want gold, you want wealth, you want your entire house to be built of gold and silver with jewelries. Visualize it and pop, it's there. What's the big deal? Now what? Is that all you're going to stop with and say, this is it, now I've reached my life's goal, now I'm going to live in this house for the rest of eternity? It seems so silly because in a moment you can change it to whatever you want. Make the house 10,000 times bigger. And then what? And then what? If you have read Savitri carefully, you will see Ashwapati goes across worlds. Each world he describes in detail the characteristics, its strengths, its limitations, and it ends always with the limitations. And then what? How will this limitation be fulfilled? Because eventually the soul is not satisfied with this. The soul is very happy. First you enter it. Oh, I have all these things. Wonderful. And then you hit the limitations. And then the soul says, but that's not enough. I need to have something which is beyond these limitations. And so you have to move to the next world. And the next, and the next. You see, it's very interesting. So, with all this magnified, prolonged, extended, etc., he carries by this translation the vital joy and vital suffering of the physical being into supraphysical conditions in which they have a greater scope, fullness, and endurance. So, whatever your vital joy or vital suffering, even if you feel you have to be punished or you are in some pain of some kind, scope is greater, fullness is greater, endurance is also greater, because you don't have the limitations of the nerves which would be numbed. In the subtle body there is no numbing. These constructive environments must therefore be considered, so far as they have any supraphysical habitat, as annexes of the vital or of the lower mental planes of existence. So these are worlds in themselves, but they are bubbles of your creation, and they could be infinitely large, but they would still be in your bubble. So they are annexes of the actual vital or the lower mental planes of existence, but they are habitats. You can stay in them for as long as you like. These constructive environments must be therefore considered. Now, are there actually things which are not constructed? So that's the next paragraph. What's the real thing? But there are also the true vital worlds, original constructions, that is, in their origin they come from the source. Original constructions, organized developments, native habitats of the universal life principle, the cosmic vital anima, acting in its own field and in its own nature. So the life force itself, which is the power of the divine consciousness, has its own creativity. There's entire, I think, 2 cantos or more in Savitri where Sri Aurobindo describes the lower life worlds and the higher life worlds. And it is the life power which is the dominant creative power there. She is described as a feminine power. She chooses according to her whims and fancies. But what are her drives? What are the principles on which she creates and forms? What are the limitations of those principles, both in the lower and the higher operations of life? It's fascinating to really understand the nature of the life power when you read those, if you read within that way. This is actually a description of the life power, prana, but as a conscious being, a vital anima, the cosmic principle. And how does she create? What does she create? What are her drives? What are her moods? What is her effort? What are all the nuances of her efforts? All that you'll find mapped out in Savitri. It's one of those most amazing texts when you understand it in this way, literally. People say, it's a poetic description of something, and then they discard it. No, it's not. It's a real description of a reality of that world and the principles and powers which create those worlds. So, on his internatal journey, this is now we are talking of the person who's making the transition, he may be held there for a period by force of the predominantly vital character of the influences which have shaped his earthly existence. So remember, we got stuck in our bubble initially, which were formed by the earthly existence. Now we have moved out of the bubble. So we find ourselves in the real vital worlds of whatever grade it is that corresponds to your current development or current focus and interest. So you're in this world now, you're experiencing this, but you're held there. By what? What prevents you from going further? By force of the predominantly vital character of influences which have shaped his earthly existence. The turn of the vital nature which shaped you while on earth in the body is now the same force which binds you into this domain. For these influences are native to the vital world, and their hold on him would detain him for a while in their proper province. So the same vital influence which acted in you while in the body, now that influence is living in its own world, which is the vital world, and you have come into its world. Earlier it had come into your world, in your biology, in your physical body, in your physical experience of life. So let's say somebody has strong passions or angers by habit. He's seized by passion. He's a passionate person. He's always immersing himself in the passionateness of anything he talks about, feels or shares. That's the nature. Seized by passion, the tiniest detail. Go out of the body, that same passion force which was driving you, now you're in its world, you belong to its world. It is now dominating you. And attaches you to that world, because this is the way I've lived, this is the passion in which I thrive now, this is my home. So you feel. Or equivalent. Let's say it's a state of calm that you always had. I'm unhappy, uncomfortable with these passions and disturbances. I prefer to be in a state of calm, wideness. That's the state I'm used to being in. Well, I am now in that domain and in the world which corresponds to that. And I stay there because that's my comfort. I'm habituated to that, now I'm in that habituated state. That's all. That will detain him. He may be kept in the grasp of that which held him in its grasp even in the physical being. It held you here, now it holds you there, that's all. Any residence of the soul in annexes or in its own constructions could be only a transitional stage of the consciousness in its passage from the physical to the supraphysical state. It must pass from these structures into the true worlds of supraphysical nature. So you pass through your annex stage, now you've got into the true world, but of the same type. It may enter at once into the worlds of other life, or it may remain first as a transitional stage in some region of subtle physical experience whose surroundings may seem to it a prolongation of the circumstances of physical life, but in freer conditions proper to a subtler medium and in some kind of happy perfection of mind or life or a finer bodily existence. So now he's going to reach detail of these transitions. So first step in the entry, it may be in a transitional stage in some region of the subtle physical experience, which is like a prolongation of your physical life, but in conditions of the subtler medium of some perfection of mind, life, or finer bodily existence, corresponding to that grade of consciousness which we have been discussing. So you are just a miser who have just left your body, and your surrounding now becomes the image of the mansion in which you lived, let's say, and the thing you're greedy or attached to, etc. So you've recreated as if, but somehow everything is more finer, freer, lighter, larger, clearer, fresher, brighter, etc. Happy perfection of mind or life or finer bodily existence. Somehow I don't seem to age, somehow I don't feel very tired. I can eat all I want for hours and hours and hours, and somehow I don't feel full, because I like to eat, so I continue to eat. What's happening? While I was in the body, I would get full, I would get a stomach ache if I ate so much. Now I can go on eating, is so much more fun, right? Beyond these subtle physical planes of experience and the life worlds, there are also mental or spiritual mental planes to which the soul seems to have an internatal access, and into which it may pursue its internatal journey. So subtle physical planes, life worlds, mental planes, and spiritual mental planes to which you may have access. Now spiritual mental, remember, it's spiritual consciousness in the mental domain. So in the English language, that's how you go. If you say physical vital, it is vital of the nature of physical. Vital physical would be physical with a turn to the vital. So when he says spiritual mental, it means a mental zone but turned to the spiritual. Now this is the reality, and it's not easy to draw that in a textbook, so you'll find all the books are wrong. But Sri Aurobindo describes like this in Savitri. Any plane you take, it has parts which turn to the higher and parts which turn to the lower. So it's as if the plane spreads out up and down to span the full range, but in the vital, full range. So in the vital you have the lower hells and the inconscient domains. In the vital you have the higher heavens and the mental realms, mental heavens, and even the spiritual perhaps glimpses represented in the vital domain. Okay, so in this case it's spiritual mental planes. In the mental, turn to the spiritual. So you have not properly entered the spiritual world in itself, but you have entered into the zone of the mental worlds which correspond to that spiritual vibration. It's very important though. It's very precious, because through that you get the link to the higher spiritual worlds. But so the soul has access in the internatal passage. into which it may pursue its internatal journey. So you have now, let's say you've come into your own, you're out of the body, you are now, you know that you've left your body, you are able to go across these worlds, experience all these. Well, where would you be drawn to? That which was the dominant theme of your life, or at the time of leaving the body, whichever is stronger, well, you end up there. And then you can move around freely. But this is where you'd like to be, because it's more natural to you in your current evolutionary state. But you can go into the spiritual mental worlds also. Why not? Why not just stay there then? Here's the problem. But it is not likely to live consciously there if there has not been a sufficient mental or soul development in this life. So let's say you can rise into that, oh wow, this is so wonderful, I'd like to live there, but I can't. After a while, as if some kind of an inertia pulls me down, and then come back to this, which is my default familiar state. So you cannot, not likely to live there consciously. Meaning you could stay there in a kind of a superconscious state, but you have no conscious awareness, or you drop back into your conscious zone, or you can't stay too long. There has not been a sufficient mental or soul development in this life. So in order to be able to stay in a particular state, you must have developed that grade of consciousness. So in this case, it's a spiritual mental world. So either you must have mental development or soul development, or both ideally, and the two unified in your biology life state. Then you would have access to that as easily as you had it here. So you see why what we do here in our life, in our evolution, is so critical, and is actually becomes the definition of the access that we would have after we leave the body. For these levels must normally be the highest the evolving being can internally inhabit, since one has not gone beyond the mental rung in the ladder of being. Since one who has not gone beyond the mental rung in the ladder of being would not be able to ascend to any supramental or over-mental state. So, if you can internally inhabit that state, then you can inhabit that world. But if you have not gone beyond the mental rung in your being, then you cannot go into that supra-mental or over-mental state. So, if he had so developed, or if he had so developed as to overleap the mental level and could attain so far, it might not be possible for him to return so long as the physical evolution has not developed here an organization of an overmental or supramental life in matter. So this is an interesting thing. You could, for example, have skipped a certain level, skip the mental level and touch some kind of an intuitive level. But you're not able to go back to that intuitive level if you have not built the bridge of continuity in the physical evolution, which would then make possible for you to enter those worlds and stay in those worlds. Think about how important this is. So actually what happens after you leave your biology body and enter those worlds, your access to them is largely a representation of the stages of gradations of consciousness you have developed, or you have habituated yourself to, or that you have integrated in sequence to build a bridge, to build a ladder that now makes you possible to go into those worlds. Or you enter those worlds but you can't stay too long. You either find yourself going into a swoon, like sleep-like swoon, white out, blackout kind of state, or you find yourself falling back, drifting back to what is more familiar and accessible. So this is the background of these two worlds, the annexes and the real worlds. But I want to insert one more description here. Despite all this limitation, let's say you have not developed those higher ranges. Despite all these, you can still access those worlds. Two ways. One is something of your own higher consciousness reaches down and pulls you up to give you an experience. Or the divine grace, the divine Shakti, the divine mother pulls you there. I have given the example of Huta Hindocha, whose hand's mother used to draw the paintings of Savitri, which you will find in Savitri Bhavan in Aurobindo. And the books are also on print. For those of you who would like those books, you will find them on the Deeply Publications website. So the paintings of Huta for Savitri and other paintings, other poems of Sri Aurobindo that mother drew through her hands. So they are representations of those worlds. But what you see there is mother said everything that Huta had to draw had to be experienced by her first. So when it came to the dark worlds and the hells, well, Mother took her to those hells, showed her those experiences, and then she had to draw them in that consciousness while it was fresh. But equally, the Mother took her into the supramental world to experience this. And then the next day she had to make those drawings. So keep this in mind, that the power that comes into the painting from the living experience. But how could she do that? If Huta herself has not developed those, why? Because the Mother lives in those domains, they are hers. So she can infuse into you her substance corresponding to that grade which you don't have, and thus lift you and draw you into those worlds with full clarity of sustained awareness. And as that substance within you fades out, you will find yourself drifting, either going into a swoon or sliding back. Interesting. But this is equally true in the physical body. When the Mother blessed you, she infused substance of the higher consciousness, and as long as it filled you, you were exalted and lifted to the higher domain in your body, and you had all those beautiful ideas and beautiful insights and beautiful experiences which correspond to that domain of substance, and it's yours, as if you're in that world while embodied. And as that substance fades out from you, you kind of find yourself sinking back, falling back into your normal, familiar state. So this can happen while you're in the body, it can happen while you're out of the body, and this is what we would call the divine grace, filling you and drawing you up, taking you into any level of consciousness and giving you the capacity, building in you the capacity to stay there by infusing in you repeatedly those higher gradations of consciousness. Or you open yourself, invoke her presence, let her fill you and lift you to whatever level, and through a repeated series of such shifts, you familiarize yourself, you become normal in a higher grade of consciousness, and so on. But it's still the process of building bridges here, of continuity of consciousness, and being then thereby able to stay in that higher state, which then reflects when you're out of the body, either after death or in the out of body state, which gives you that kind of an access. But even there the grace can act, even here she can act. And I'm showing you the correspondence between the two. It's the same thing in body or outside. And that's the nature of the sadhana. To be able to build this continuity of bridges, of levels of consciousness, and being able to live now familiar in that state. And from there re-infuse that substance into the lower ones and lift all of the lower parts of your nature into that higher grade of consciousness. Because in the physical there's a part which turns to the spiritual, in the vital there's a part which turns to the spiritual, in the mental there's a part which turns to the spiritual. Therefore all these parts in you can be made to turn to the spiritual and receive the spiritual substance and be spiritualized as a consequence. And it is in this direction that the real effort of the sadhana in the integral yoga grows, to make the entirety of your consciousness more and more divine, more and more spiritual, and live in it and live by it, by its truth, by its consciousness. Substantially transform into its terms. And this is possible because there is this continuity from every level all the way to the spiritual. So this is the background of the worlds and our passage. We have not yet completed the text. If after this you have got so far, is that the end? But he says, but even so, the mental worlds are not likely to be the last normal stage of the after-death passage. For man is not entirely mental. It is the soul, the psychic being, and not the mind that is the traveler between death and birth. And the mental being is only a predominant element in the figure of its self-expression. There must then be a final resort to a plane of pure psychic existence, in which the soul would await rebirth. So what is this transition into the psychic existence? We are going to take up this text in next time. But look at the rich scope, perspective, understanding, insight that we have when you really go in depth in the way he articulates things. And so having gone through all those stages in your journey after leaving the body, the last step will be now the withdrawing into the psychic existence for the psychic rest. And what would you do? What happens in that state? Which is the most important thing. Now, all of this, remember, will link to the bigger picture of what we are discussing, how you can build continuity across lives. So that will become clearer as we go along. But once you have to understand this process, you know what it is that persists, why something cannot persist or can be made to persist. And once you understand that, the rest will be the consequence. So for now, simply hold in your mind the importance of what we do and the way we live, the state in which we live, the values by which we live, our primary drives and the habitual tendencies of our thoughts, emotions, feelings, self-awareness, consciousness, etc., of our daily routine life. How important they are. If in the after-death state they take you into higher access of worlds, well, in the in-body state also they give you the same access to those worlds. But we don't realize how important it is, and therefore we neglect the cultivation, culturing of our general state of consciousness. To be able to consciously draw yourself up and open to something higher and live by and in that higher should be our daily effort in all states, from all problems, in all difficulties, in all circumstances. So think about this, dwell on it, let this become your primary aspiration in your efforts, in everything you do in life. And remember, in the midst of the most difficult, the higher help of the Divine Shakti can fill you with her consciousness and pull you up to whichever level she chooses to draw you to, because she has all the substance of all the gradations to draw you into the spiritual realms even. Right now while in the body or out of body, but build the habit while in the body and the access will be easy, natural after. So invoke her help, ask her to fill you, let your consciousness open to her and deepen that relationship with the easiest way to do, which is the joyous self-giving in love to her. Let that be the foundation on which we live in everything we do in life. Let's concentrate in this for a while.